Welcome back to week 4 of Somber Talks. This topic is going to be where we talk about setting and worlds. I find that this is an often neglected part of writing, and I'm not exactly sure why, because in many ways it can also be some of the funnest parts of writing that you get to do. This is also important as far as world building is concerned because world building is not just something that is done in stories. World building is something that people in Second Life do very intimately in spaces. So it helps to kind of think when you're planning a world, what sorts of things to incorporate, how to build it out, and what kind of stories you plan to. This is going to be a longer than usual presentation, mostly because we only have 1 week left and I have 3 topics I wanted to hit. So I'm mashing together setting and world building because they're more closely related. I'm hoping that we will have time to do reading and workshops. See where we are. It's all done. This one's probably going to be a lot more talk and a lot less share, unfortunately. So I apologize. Go ahead and get started here. So, all right. So the setting is essentially where your story is going to be taking place. You have to understand that when you're dealing with a story, the story is generally the an analogy that I like to use is a story is like taking a trip, and the characters are the people you're taking the trip with, and the road that you're on is the plot that the story is going to be taking you. But the setting is all of the stuff that you're driving through. And it can make a big difference whether you're driving through a nice, colic forest or a driving across Texas for 12 hours, or if you're, driving through a section of Detroit that you probably shouldn't be driving down. Setting matters. It creates a lot of context for the story and affect the way that your story occurs in very surprising ways. And it's also a way to make your story matter. Um, Most people, when they write a story, their biggest concern is, well, I just hope my readers enjoy it. But depending on how you portray your setting and how you advance it, you can make your story matter more than just is it enjoyed or is it not enjoyed. So, as always, I try to emphasize story first. There are people that love to world build. They will make a setting and they will spend months or years planning it out. They'll have countries, they'll have culture, customs, um, but they won't actually have a story to tell with it. Um, Very few people will read a story simply for the world. It's not 100%, but it's generally people are there for the story and they stay for the setting. Um, So we're going to look at some of the different ways that setting can be used beyond just, oh, what does the area story is happening in. So on the most basic level, a setting is a stage that your characters stand on that all of the audience is going to be interacting with. Without a decent setting, your characters are essentially just floating in this gray void of nothingness that the reader has to kind of populate based off of what you tell them is going on. So if you say that it's in a gas station, um, nobody that is listening to this has the exact same gas station in their imagination. But we can all kludge together enough of a concept that it's not that vital we can get through the scene. But if there's very specific things, like this gas station, is a post-apocalyptic methanol distillery that, makes fuel freighter vehicles, that is far more distinct a setting than just gas station. So you want to, when you're using your setting as a stage, you want it to be something that supports the story. And it could be everything from just the immediate, like what is actually seen, to what is, abstract about the entire the wasteland or places like that. Um, There are some people that love to dump setting all over the place, but you really only want to use as much setting as you need to tell your story. If you start throwing in setting for the sake of telling setting, some readers will tolerate that, but other readers will get bored very quickly because it's not pertaining to the actual story that you're telling at the moment. Um, Sometimes you can get tricky. Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm going to drop this little detail, and then 5 or 6 chapters later, it's going to become pertinent. Um, you can do that, but be aware some readers might turn off before they get to that section and get that aha moment that you're planning. So just be careful with how much setting you dump on a reader. Make sure that it's what you need to advance your story. So occasionally you do get a setting that is a story in and of itself. These used to be extremely popular back when people largely couldn't travel very far, and in some ways it's making a comeback. With you when you look at people who love the world building in stories like Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and even My Little Pony. A setting in and of itself can be a story in that you can tell what it's like to live in this world or travel across this world. A lot of humans in Equestria stories are essentially setting a story. Um, it can be seen as a way to escape to a place that you're not going to see, so there's a lot of appeal in that. And in general, the story and the characters in an odd way support the setting more than the other way around. Usually it's the characters and setting that support the story, but you can get away with switching it up occasionally. Not all readers will like it. There are certainly readers that will be like, this is boring, I don't see anything happening, these characters don't seem to be doing anything, I'm going to move on. Um, but you
I'm sorry, Sakari forgot to mute her mic. She's
okay.
okay. She has little toddlers.
Okay. Like, is everyone okay over there? All right.
It's fine. They're kids. They bounce off the wall like flubber.
But in any case, as I was saying, when you're dealing with setting as your story, your setting really matters. And so you want to make sure that your setting is engaging, it is unusual, it's intriguing, and that it gives the readers something to really latch onto, carry them through the story. So the classic term is a Milo story. Rich people would travel across France and stop at little villages and see the villagey stuff that they didn't see in the cities. A travel story is another version, like Night on the Orient Express, or even stories like Conrad's Heart of Darkness. It's essentially you are going to a place and the setting is the story, not the characters as much. Nope. All right. So the next step is using setting as a theme. Um, Generally, when you're using thematic elements to your story, you have an idea of how you want your story to be conveyed to the reader. If you are dealing with like dark elements, very frequently you'll have a lack of light. You'll have shadows with special significance. The reader will pick up these hints that when things get dark, um, it's time to get serious. And so, whenever you're using your theme, your setting can directly relate to some of the themes that you want to employ, um, depending on how you decide to use them in terms of descriptions or messaging. So, when you're planning your story, you have your characters, you have that are going to go through it, and you think of what are the major things I want in this story, as far as ideas. And then think of how are ways that you can convey this indirectly with the setting. Some people like to tackle themes directly, and we're actually going to get more into that in the next bit. But other people is like, my story is about good versus evil, and to me, in my story, evil is industrialization and destruction of the natural world. So whenever I'm going to have a evil scene or an evil organization, they're going to look industrial. And they're going to have like motor oil everywhere and dirt and grime everywhere and concrete all over the place. Because I'm trying to convey this message that industrialization and whatnot leads to evil. Alternatively, you can go with themes. You can use the exact same theme, but you could go with shapes like spikes, saw blades, different brooding mountains that are covered with storm clouds. I mean, the possibilities are almost infinite on how you want to use the setting that your story is taking place to convey the themes that you want to tell. And it's a great way to help enrich your story without having the characters be forced to bear all of this burden. You're essentially setting the scene for the reader, saying, yes, in this place, it is good versus evil, and here's how you can identify evil in this world. If you want to play subtle, you can also play subtle as well. It doesn't have to be overt. It can also be subvert. Like if you are trying to show that conformity is evil, that's the theme that you're looking at. You can have a very nice, regular, suburban type subdivision, but you can describe the regularity, the way that all of the houses are the same design, and they all go from blue, yellow to red, blue, yellow, red in an unnatural pattern. And by being subtle, you don't have to tell the reader, this is a very strange place where conformity is bad. But you make the reader feel uncomfortable with the setting that you're presenting. And that way, they start to catch on these themes that you're planning on using on your story. So when you're planning your setting for your story, think of what themes you want to weave through your story to kind of build on it a little. It's perfectly fine to have a story that's just simply X happens. That's what a story is. But if you want to enrich that story by adding more ideas into it, then a setting is a great place to do that. There aren't a lot of expectations for settings, whereas a person can like or dislike a character. With a setting, you have much more leeway. Okay? So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with your setting and when you're thinking about what kind of themes you're planning on employing. Oh, come on. All right. Now, setting as commentary. Okay, so this might irk some people because when you talk about social commentary, generally you have people that are very keen on it and you have people that are very not keen on it. For those that are keen on it, setting can be a point where you can talk about real world problems. It is a place where you can say, you know what, I am very concerned about climate change, so I'm going to create a world in which magic is like global war. And so as all these wizards keep using magic, it's building up the amount of magic in the world, and the world is becoming more and more unstable because everyone just keeps using magic. That's a setting that you can use for your story, but it's also a commentary on a real world problem. Sometimes this can be very overt, sometimes it can be very subvert. Overt example would be something like the movie Bright, which is supposed to be this Tolkien-esque, examination of race relations and just gets it horribly wrong because it's so overt that it's like, just make these characters human and lose the magic bit. Other times, you can be very subtle in talking about problems in the real world through your writing. If you are creating a fantasy world, you can explore racism or speciesism without actually having to say the words black and white. These are very loaded terms when you're talking about real world problems in the United States. But if you can take a step back into a different setting, you can now open this topic and explore it without necessarily having to have people feel defensive about the. These are important conversations to have, but not everyone can have them in the context of real world issues because there's too much invested in them. But in the context of a story, you can get far more connection depending on how you use it. Um, because the setting doesn't really fit hand in glove with the story, you have that kind of flexibility. Like your world can have racism or speciesism, but that may not be a cornerstone of the story itself. It's an element that you can comment on, that you can work in, but it's not necessarily a critical part of the story itself. Now, do this at your own risk. There are some people that will take commentary, social commentary, and they will be enthralled by it. They will look at your writing and they will say, "This is amazing what you're doing, and this relates to real world issues that I deal with or people with." And other people will be like, "I read this stuff to escape from the real world. Why are you bringing this to my attention now?" You cannot please both groups. So, if you are going to be a writer that tackles commentary in your fiction, um, you need to be aware that you are going to be getting some flack for it. Some readers just don't want to engage with it. Other readers will love you for it. It just depends on what kind of stories you want to tell. Okay, I think that's. Let's see. Is this a good place for questions? Okay, so does anybody have questions just on setting itself? Settings is for your whatnot. You can put them in Twitch, and they'll get forwarded to me, or just go ahead and just put it in nearby chat. If I remember correctly, H.P. Lovecraft went the opposite direction, putting his xenophobia in stories. Yeah, you can go. Commentary cuts both ways. Some people do want. Some people have opinions that may not be, shall we say, widely accepted. They want to put them into their stories. They can do that. But other people can also judge them on that inclusion. And today, H.P. Lovecraft, he gets a lot of flack for his anti-Semitism and racism that did. No, you write what you write, and what you write is a reflection of who you are. So make sure that it is the truest reflection of yourself, because it can last longer than you. It makes me think of Final Fantasy 6 and 7. Sure. Yeah, Heinlein and his sexism. They're there. Star Trek Voyager to get a good job with Neelix's backstory. I'm not that familiar with Neelix, other than I kind of wished he wasn't on the show, I'm sorry to say. But I'm not that much into Voyager. Do you think it's too dangerous to put social commentary into the setting of the story? Onyx and Drake do it pretty well. I think that it is up to the reader if they want to make that risk or not. Some people really latch onto that. It's important to them. It makes it matter for them. Other people just simply do not. They don't want to hear that setting. They don't want to consider what it might mean, and they find it distracting. They're like, if this doesn't directly impact the story, why is it here? It depends on the kind of writer you are, and you have to be true to your writing. Some people will say, no, you should make your writing as benign as possible, so the most people that read it will possibly read it. Well, great, but you're essentially just making a disposable commodity. So it's up to you to decide if you want to take that danger. It is a danger, but it can be worthwhile if you do it well. If you're starting out writing, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you honestly have been writing, it wouldn't be not be amiss. You could quite honestly, if you wanted to tackle this, you could write an MLP story dealing with Earth ponies and unicorn, Rarity and Rarity and Applejack, talking about life in Canterlot or in Manhattan, and if you're a unicorn, in Canterlot, you know, the law is a great, wonderful, safe thing. Royal guards are all safe, but then Applejack points out there are no Earth ponies on the road. They're all Pegasi and Unicorn. You know, you can explore that. Some people would look at that and see what's going on in the U.S. today and go, nope, not reading any further. And other people will adore it. So sorry, there is no right answer for whether or not you use commentary. It's just a decision you have to make. Eric Remarque had to flee Germany because of his stance on war. Yeah, well, when you write All's Quiet on the Western Front, and, you know, it's kind of critical of the whole, yeah, support your country during this terrible war because it's your country and your country is great and dying for your country is great. Yeah, it doesn't work. Piper sent me one. The creator of Kill la Kill made a commentary about nudism and why we should rely on name brands for status so much. Or why we shouldn't rely on name brands for status so much. Yeah. That's a interesting take. It's also a little risque because anything that touches on sex is basically one of the electrified rails of writing. It will get a response, and it will cause people to think something about your writing. Whether
A lot of people didn't give Kill la Kill a chance because they're like, it's all the naked women. I'm like, actually, it's all naked everyone if you give it a chance.
Yeah. And the thing is that is a risk. Some people will embrace it, some people won't. But art that is always safe is essentially sterile. It doesn't provoke new thoughts. Art that pushes comfort, that pushes assumptions, that's essentially what art is for. And so whether you take that risk or not, that's up to you as a writer. I can't say whether you can or cannot. Go a few more. Sweden's got one on here. Oh, yep, he just put it on there. Okay. Kind of don't. I suppose the comments and feedback on choices of The Last of Us Part 2 highlight the way an audience can turn these partially on that too. I don't want to get bogged down in The Last of Us 2. They made some storytelling choices and game design choices in that I don't serve them well. But I also don't want to talk for 90 minutes on Last of Us 2 because I could. So, see what time we have left. Toyed it with the idea of making sour grape racist like Lovecraft, but I figured he's complex enough. I would do it something with a character only if it supports the story, rather than just making them racist for the sake of making racist. I kind of have an issue with some of what I've read in FOE due to story character choices. Yeah, that'll happen. There are no perfect stories. There's stories you like and stories you don't like. Some of them you will like for various reasons, others you won't. As a writer, you just simply cast your story out there and you hope for the best. All right, so now we're going to get into actual descriptions of setting. This overlaps a little bit with what I was talking about with character earlier, but some people might have missed that from yesterday, or last week, so just hit some of it. So when you are providing your descriptions for your settings, you will very often be told, show, don't tell. Show, don't tell. Show, don't tell. Okay. That is good for about 60% of description. Because when you have nothing but show, don't tell, you essentially have a story that ends up 1.8 million words long. You occasionally have to tell, and it's better to sum it up as summary versus detail. What in your story needs to be summarized and what in your story needs to be detailed. Summary is essentially saying things like, it was raining, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it was a Tuesday. Those statements will allow you to construct a space and time in your head for the story, but it doesn't give you very much detail to work. if on the other hand you say the sun was at its peak as the birds tweeted on this one day, and I was so glad that it wasn't Monday anymore because yesterday was absolutely horrible. Okay, that conveys the same information, but it's much longer. And the thing is that when you are telling a story, eventually all those extra words start to add up. And if you start to lay down block after block after block of this very flowery, showing constantly description, your story isn't going to go anywhere, because essentially you're spending so much time painting the scene that you're never actually moving on to what the story actually is. So instead of always show, don't tell, think about, do I need to summarize this or do I need to go into detail? Because if you only go into detail when it matters, then when you use detail, your reader will pay attention. They'll be like, oh, he's really describing this house. This house must really matter. Like, some important things are going to happen in here. Where the house is may not even matter. We may not even need to know what city it's in or even what time it is. But we know we need to pay attention to the house because you're using description for it. If you throw show everywhere, show stops being special. So yeah, you'll have a lot of writing teachers that'll be like, you must always show, don't tell. It's like, it really depends on your story. Okay. Ultimately, you're going to come up with a ratio of summary versus detail that you're comfortable. That is essentially just the practice of writing. It takes a lot of work to learn what is the right ratio of summary versus detail. Okay. All right. Oh, come on. Next. Oh god, this is going to be so much of me talking. I'm so sorry, people. Oop, did it work? Uh-oh. I thought all these loaded.
It's working on my end.
Really?
Yeah, I see it.
Bizarre. Because it's not on mine, it's a gray screen. Can you please read me my own slides so I know what I need to talk about next?
Okay. General versus specific.
Okay. And then what was underneath it?
It says, we're in New York. We're at Times Square in New York. We're at Times Square in New York at Christmas. It was 12:41 a.m. on a snowy Christmas night in Times Square, New York.
Okay. Okay, good. Then I essentially covered that with the last slide. General versus specific, again, is summary versus detail. Decide what you need for it. Oh, now it pops up. Okay, Second Life. I see how you're going to be. But decide what level you want to use and use it consistently where it's important. Okay? You may also notice that there's a verb in there that is used over and over again. That is the verb to be. We were, it was. The more you use that verb, that is essentially the verb of to exist. And you are essentially, every time you use that, you are essentially saying that this exists. And here is its existence with all of the description after it. You can vary things up by saying, being more specific with your sentencing to try to make that sentence more specific and to really pop. But you will always use the word is in some form. It's inescapable. There are some people that will tell you never use the word is. Always use a verb that says something else. Well, yes, you can do that, but it starts to make your writing sound really weird, and it's kind of hard. So use it when necessary, but try to not use it when you can. Okay, you gonna work? You gonna work? You gonna work? All right. So the exposition block. Uh, Very frequently we will have bricks of exposition. This occurs with characters. It also occurs with settings, where someone is tempted to say, "Look, I have got to give my reader 5 pages of exposition on where this story is taking place, or the story will not make sense." Um, you may want to rethink your story if that is the case, but realistically, most readers are better having a description fed to them slowly, bit by bit, than they are going through a brick. Because what will tend to happen is the reader will identify, oh, here's a whole bunch of information. It's not really exciting. It's not really important to what's immediately happening in the story. I'm going to skip it. Then, later on in the story, when that brick becomes important, now suddenly, oh crap, I forgot that information, and now this scene doesn't make sense. So try to break up blocks as much as possible. Sometimes you just need a brick. It's a foundation building tool, and you know what? Occasionally you're going to. Once you start getting past 2 blocks of exposition, you better be moving on to something involving a story. If you're at 3 or more, you're essentially just building a wall of text, and very few people want to read that. Another way of introducing description is in a stream. And a stream is where the exposition is given in a format where either it is being delivered directly by the characters, or it is being worked in slowly through scenes and images as the story progresses. If you ever watch a show and suddenly you have like 2 characters and they're just talking about something that both characters should know, but for some reason they're discussing it, and maybe there's a 3rd character nearby who has no clue and asks the question that should be obvious, this is essentially what they're doing, is they are finding ways of introducing that world building without giving you blocks of text. So that stream of exposition is just delivering the details in a flow rather than in a chunk. Chunks are going to happen. Bricks are going to happen. Don't feel ashamed if you have one, but don't rely on 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 of them just simply because most readers won't follow along. They'll skip to the story. Hello? All right, so descriptions. Human beings are primarily sight-driven. We see things with our eyes, and with our eyes, we tend to take meaning from them. This is why art is so powerful. When people are writing stories, very frequently they will fixate on things that you can see with your eyes. And the problem is that we have 4 other senses that the author can engage that the visual artist cannot. For example, the second most predominant sense we use is our hearing. And you can use descriptions of sounds, buzzing, jarring, glurping, onomatopoeias, where the word itself can carry the sound to the reader's ears. These are ways that you can help immerse the character or the reader in what the character is experiencing. Some people occasionally like to actually use music and try to weave musicality into the setting itself. And there's actually some more avant-garde writers who will include who will include music to play on their copy of their chapters in that scene, so that as you're going through your reader, music will start to play to fit the story scene that the writer is doing. I'm not nearly that edgy, and plus you have to own the music that you're going to use if you don't want to get sued. but it is an interesting way to convey sounds to an audience. And there are readers that are more interested in the way things sound and descriptions of sound than they are in the ways things look, because we use our eyes all the time and they can start getting boring. Smells are a very primal way. We start using our sense of smell before we start using our sense of sight and hearing. Smells are some of the most powerful drivers in the human psyche. So when you are describing how an area smells, you can really convey feelings that can immerse the reader into what's going on. And, some descriptions can be so, graphic and vivid, the reader can actually be nauseated by what is being described. So never, forget that how good a good smell can move the reader, even if it's something, gross or silly or who knows what. And it's also one of those places where you can kind of get away with more description than you usually would, simply for, comedy or drama, because smell is such an immediate. Flavors are intimate. When you describe how something tastes, you can get very metaphorical, because we generally don't run our tongues along, general surfaces to see what things taste like. But when you say that, the city tasted like sex, that's a very loaded term for that city. I now have to wonder what is going on in this city, which city it is. Is this Vegas? Because it sounds like, something you would use to describe Vegas. But it's also a flavor that most people would be able to associate with one way or another. They may not actually have tasted it, but they can relate to it. Like, one of the most common phrases that you'll hear is, tastes like shit. Well, most people have not eaten that, and yet we all understand what the phrase means. So when you're thinking about you're describing an area, taste sense, that is a very good opportunity to kind of push that metaphorical, where you're looking at, I'm not trying to tell you literally how the concrete under my feet tastes. I'm actually trying to convey to you a deeper meaning to this place, to this location. Now, the last one is tactile. And tactile descriptions are very personal, because we are the only people that feel the things that we feel. Two people eat the same thing, they can share the same taste. Two people, eat the same or hear the same music. But no two people can actually know how something feels when we touch it. I mean, we can use some vague descriptors like rough, smooth, greasy, slimy, sticky, rough, calloused. We can throw these out, but only I know what those feel like, because only I have felt those for myself. So when you use tactile descriptions, they are essentially almost like you are addressing the reader themselves to have those descriptions. So remember those other senses. It's very tempting to just, what do I see? What do I see? What do I see? What do I see? Try to add those other senses. What does it sound like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? You don't have to use all five for every description. Okay, don't go too far. And just like, I have to have, sound, taste, smell, and everything. But when it's important, when you're trying to make a moment or a scene really matter, it's a good time to bust those out. Okay, I think we're at a question point. Is it going to load? Is it going to load? You can load. Come on.
It's loaded for me.
Why, Second Life? Why do you taunt me so? Okay. Alright, here it goes. Woohoo! Alright. So, very frequently when you are describing Description. Two words to keep in mind is granular versus fantastic. Um, they're not exactly mutually exclusive, but it's kind of a slider of description. So when you are trying to decide what kind of description best fits your story, you need to kind of decide, are you going to go for the more fantastic side, or are you going to be going more for the more granular side? Game of Thrones is an example of a granular story where you can see it, you can smell it. The focus is on the world and things happening in the world, as opposed to larger kind of emotions and themes. Essentially, with a granular description, you are presenting the world as detailed and accurately as possible to the reader and letting the reader make whatever conclusions they will make. If you've set things up right, they will make the conclusion you want them to. And if you don't put a lot of thought into it, they may have conclusions that you did not expect them to make. You cannot control what your reader will think of your description. But granular description, a lot of people like because of the realistic feel to it. A lot of people praise the Game of Thrones books because of that description, because it's like, oh, I see this story or I read these descriptions and I have a feeling of being there, to the point where it's like, I don't even want to be in this world. It's so granular that it's like unpleasant to be there. The opposite is the fantastic description. And with fantastic description, we talk about fantasy, but we very rarely think about what it is. And a fantasy is actually a dream. And so when you think about a dream, very few dreams, unless you've been doing some exotic substances, focus on granular details. They tend to focus more on conceptual ideas and feelings and narratives. If you're really wanting to focus on the story and the characters, it may be better to have a fantastic description where your story is more to the point of, look, it's a fantasy story where we have a knight saving a princess, so we have the castles and we have all this, and we don't really need to get into the really deep description. Okay? Because honestly, that's not what the story is about. The story is about, the knight and the princess. You have to decide. It's very rare that a writer can pull both off. The reason is because they are somewhat mutually exclusive. Fixating on, this character's wart, it becomes very hard to, comment about the power of love overcoming the evil dragon. So as a writer, you sort of have to decide what you're going to go for and just embrace it. Focus on making it the best that you can. Occasionally, some writers will try to go from granular to fantastic and back to granular and back to fantastic. It's possible. It's hard because that's very inconsistent. And so if you have an in-story reason for going from granular to fantastic, that helps a lot. If you've ever played the Dragon Age games, whenever somebody goes essentially into the spirit world, the terrain becomes far more fantastical. The granular detail doesn't matter because this is a place of concept. And so as you go through this place, you're fighting things like hunger and lust and pride as demons or spirits, rather than people with nationalities and professions and things like this. So this is another good slider to keep in mind when you're thinking about what kind of description you want for your story. Whew. Somber's throat is going to be destroyed by the end of this. All right. I think we are almost at a questioning point. I think I might have one more about immersion. Is it going to load? Yes, immersion. Okay. So immersion is something that you may hear about quite a bit when you were talking about movies or video games. But it also applies to stories as well, and even visual art. And honestly, I believe it also applies to Second Life as well. When a audience member is immersed in a story, they are essentially processing that world as if it was the real world. When a character is immersed in a story, or a audience is immersed in a story, and something happens, they're going to be processing it in their brains as if it was actually happening to them, even though they know that it is a fiction. Um, it's essentially why theater is a thing. It's essentially why art matters. When we are engaged to this level, we are essentially achieved that point that every artist strives for. Low immersion tends to happen with settings that are just merely descripted. The walls were yellow. There was a hutch in the corner, and a fan spun overhead, and it smelled like cinnamon tea. Those are all descriptions. Everyone can kind of parse through what that looks like, but I doubt very few of you were like feeling like you were in such a place, smelling such things. Immersion is tough. It comes with practice. It's a lot of luck. It's a lot of skill. And you can't pull it off for everybody because no two people have the same criteria for being immersed in a setting. You try for the best. And if you can get it, enjoy it. Give yourself big points when someone says, I feel it. Your story was so well described, I felt like I was there. There is no higher praise for an artist. All right, are we done? All right, so. Woohoo! Question part 2. So when we're talking about description, who has questions? Rinberg.
I sent you a couple from the live stream.
Okay.
They're a little bit buried, but they're there.
Okay.
Oh, you did too?
Okay, so if something feels like a certain element, how does it feel to all kinds of people? Like as in a element of harmony? Moondrop Musaku Rinberg. Okay, Waterdrop Musaku. Munasaku. Munasaku. I can read these names. Something so like an element of harmony. How does it feel to all kinds of people? I suppose that it would depend if you're going to say that the elements of harmony from the show have some kind of almost aura about them. The show doesn't go to those depths, but it might be an interesting thing to play with. Whereas like Applejack is the element of honesty, and suddenly other ponies find they can't lie around her. Now suddenly, you have ponies that are avoiding her because they're afraid that they're going to make her, or she's going to make them tell the truth because she's around them. It's more of a story idea. As far as setting goes, I'm not really sure. It's things that you could explore if you wanted to in a story, but the show itself doesn't go that far. So you would be treading some very unfamiliar ground. I'm not sure how I myself would pull. So yeah, that'd be a trick, all right. How does one write the sense instinct by showing instead of telling? It's easier in first person because you can directly convey the emotional response to stimuli. If you are doing it third person, it starts to feel a lot more telly because you're describing things like, you start basically dropping adjectives like ominous or, jagged or things like this that essentially imply the threat, and then you show the character reacting versus the instinct. Like I said, when you're in that first person mode, it's a lot easier. Second person mode, it's far harder because the reader not have that instinct. And third person, it just takes a lot of practice. You really got to get a little creative with your sentences. You got to avoid a lot of the ises that tend to bog down the language and make things flat. really work at engaging those other senses, because while sight is a very while sight is an instinctive one, smell is by far a more instinctive smell. Like if you just describe a scene smelling like copper, half your readers are going to know there's blood somewhere. There's a blood pool. Like the metallic smell of blood is a very primal instinct that we have that sets off alarm in us. Because if something just got hurt, the thing that hurt them could still be around. So yeah, so it's a challenge, but can be done. All right, makes me remember when I did an RP event at Final Fantasy. Oh, I think from gathering in what you've said, setting isn't just location, time, and description, but also how the character reacts to the place. Absolutely. In many ways, it helps if you think of a setting as a character in and of itself. It may not speak on its own, but it still is doing things to interact with the character to advance the story. Whether that's to help the character or to harm the character is up to you. But a setting is rarely just a passive place. If it is, why have the setting at all? So yeah, you're not wrong to think of a setting as a character. It's just rarely so interactive as a character itself is. I always imagine the elements having faint scents, like rainbow smells like ozone, Twilight Gold books. Yeah, sure. Would not surprise me if you put that in, and I think that would be a good connection for a reader to pick up on. That's more character description than setting description, but it still fits. You can also use the other 4 senses for characters as much as places. Smells like a cat. I'm sure pony gems smell like something. Well, if you ask Spike, they would. It was actually funny when I was using gems in Project Horizons, I gave them flavors. Purple gems were fruity and the red ones were spicy, and Blackjack liked the red ones. You can do that, and it adds this kind of weird twist that can make the reader go, huh, I never ever thought about that. So okay, so now from the Twitch. Green and prime, black and green bug. How can an environment be used to enhance a character other than imposing them? So it depends on the story and what you need to have happen to the character. If you need a character that is opposed, and a setting can do that simply by having walls in place or natural barriers or cliffs or whatnot. When you need the environment to facilitate the character, that's a double-edged sword. Some people will be like, oh, well, the real world doesn't help us out like that. But if you're going for a more fantastic bent, a very famous one is like the healing of nature, where the character is hurt or they're lost or they're scared and they go out in the woods, and the woods are green and calm and peaceful and healing, and they overcome their own to eventually prevail. Very frequently when you have training montages, they take place in nature, with the idea that nature is a place where imbalances of society are correct. You can likewise do it just by setting up, say, world building, where it's at war, and here is all of this military apparatus to help the characters. There's a variety of ways that you can do it. It just kind of depends on what you need to happen specifically. Captain Horrors. Pathetic fallacy is something you might want to research. Should I Google it now?
That was me answering that person's question.
Okay. Takes a shot every time you say, oh, come on. Oh, okay. Fluttershy probably smells like a litter box with all the animals she has. I've never seen a story take that take, but you know what? They're probably right. If you've ever smelled someone that works at a zoo when they're coming off their shift, it's a little funky. Was there any others? Is there a way to mitigate frustration of disrupted fantasy while maintaining the commentary? So you can't control what players are going to be frustrated by. If you have consistent rules, you should be able to keep it in check when you're going between granular description and fantastical description. Um, sorry, I misunderstood. As far as the, okay, I'm mixing fantasy with modern controversy, you gotta be subtle. If you do something like the movie Bright, where you just replace black people with orcs, you are in fact doing a disservice. You are basically exploiting commentary. It's something that has to be considered carefully, and it's something that has to be worked in carefully. If you simply just go, oh, this is my social cause that I care about, and just ignore how you present it, it can blow up in your face really bad. Happened with me a couple times with some things that I wrote in Horizons, where there's people that have negative feelings about me for stuff I wrote, and, well, I wrote it, so sorry. But it's a trick, and there is no perfect way of doing it. Best that you can do is to treat the social thing that you're commenting on respectfully, not mockingly. If you mock a social problem, it doesn't say a lot about you as a writer. It basically says that people might think that you're simply projecting your own insecurities on whatever you are writing about. And if you do it wrong, people are going to be accusing you of doing it wrong. But if you at least treat the topic as a serious topic, the consequences as serious consequences, most of the time readers will stay with you. Some won't, and you just have to accept that. That's one of the prices of being a writer. Okay, and then there's Last of Us 2. All right, so any other questions on descriptions and the like? I once wrote a 110-page story and it nearly killed me. If you want to ask me about actual writing processes, I can answer that when I'm all done. I am the only one person in the world who liked write. You know what? People like what they like, and some people don't like what others like. What can you do? Last of Us 2 is now becoming Fight Club. Oh dear, what a topic. All right, so now for the second half. Don't worry, it's shorter. So, when we are talking about world building is not just for writing. World building is art. World building is game design. World building is Second Life. World building is essentially creating something for a story. And it basically just is you are creating new ideas that are not found in the contemporary world. Like when you were dealing with all those games people love, Dragon Age, Mass Effect, those did not exist until someone decided to go through the process of creating those worlds and deciding what is needed in those worlds. But if you are even writing a contemporary story or even fan fiction where the world is already made for you, likely you will still have to create some world to progress your story further. It's very rare that you actually have a world that is perfectly suited for your story, unless it's contemporary fiction, which is boring. No, that's not fair. Even in contemporary fiction, you will sometimes make up locations and places to suit your story. Some don't. Some very profitable writers Maya Angelou, they were very good at using real world locations to tell their stories. Um, those people have my admiration. I just make stuff up. So, good world building, though, when you create a world that is well built and put together and coherent, um, it will be a story generator. People will look at that world and go, I want to create stories for that world. My Little Pony is an excellent example, where it's accessible, it's vibrant, there's lots of themes, there's lots of unknowns that you can fill out, and it's a very forgiving setting. So there's reasons why when a world is well built, people tend to care a great deal about it. All right. Ooh. Next. Come on. You can do it. You can load. Can you?
Somber, I just realized Taco's back there. Look at it.
Tacos? I can't see tacos. Tacos, what are you doing?
He's back there sitting in a blackjack pillow fort as blackjack.
He's going meta. Oh no. All right. When you are creating a world, the golden rule, the thing to remember more than anything else is consistency. Whatever you create, you need to stick with it. This can be just as simple as, the name of the town to, the names of entire, galaxies and pantheons and everything else. You have to be consistent. If you start changing things, you're going to start confusing your reader very quickly, and you might start even sending the reader contrary messages that you didn't plan to. This is a problem where you have very big, complex, and you don't really take the time to remember or learn all of the most important aspects of it. And it's something that can come back and bite you in the butt in bad ways. Really, kind of, well, not that's more character design than world design. I'm trying to think of a story where they changed the setting. Assistant. Darn, I'm drawing a blank. Should have put an example up. Anyway, but you want to always strive for consistency as much as possible. And so try to put down, when you are doing your world building, it doesn't hurt to jot down notes. You may think that you know something and that you are going to remember it later on. Be surprised how often it falls through. And there's a lot of software now that can help you out with that, like, Campfire or World Anvil or whatever. Send me my check, please. But by using these software programs and using them consistently, you can catch a lot of inconsistencies in your story, especially when you're dealing with really long stories or stories that cover a very large area. Oh yeah, Bethesda. Fallout 4 is a great example of inconsistencies with things like the super mutants and the like, where the super mutants were created for a very specific reason with a very specific, cause, and in Fallout 4 they're just kind of there, even though theoretically the events of Fallout 3 should have fixed that one way or another. Fallout 4, they just completely ignore it. And some people will let that pass, and other people will this is dumb, it shouldn't be like this.
There's a lot of canon inconsistencies with Fallout 4. It would take forever to nail them all down.
Yep. And so this is, if you can avoid this, you're better off. Consistency, one, it helps immersion because you don't have those, wait a minute, that's not how the way I thought it was. It also prevents a lot of disruption in your story, because if these are your rules, these are going to shape what actually happens. And so take your time with your world building, because if you start changing things around, if you start breaking rules, if you start, not having consequences for, rules being broken, you're going to disengage your reader very, very quickly. It can get so bad that they could still care about the character, but they won't actually care what happens to the character because they no longer feel that character is legitimate because the world just no longer works for them. So it is an important thing to keep in mind when you are world building. Whew. I'm old. I need a nap. All right. How real is too real? So when you are creating a world, there are some things that you don't really have to create unless your story specifically needs it. For example, everyone in general eats, sleeps, uses money, and they need a place to live. You don't need to explain this to us, but you may need to account for it. Unless your story is extremely fantastical, where essentially it's like, yes, there's a kingdom. Don't ask me about the economics of the kingdom. Just accept that the kingdom exists and it has a princess and a knight and a dragon. You're going to need to account for certain things. Like if you present this granular kingdom that is like all desiccated and blasted, and there's millions of people, in these horrible cities, someone is going to stop and go, wait a minute, if the world is all blasted and terrible, where's the food coming from? Like, this raises some very disturbing implications about how these people are staying fed, even in spite of the fact that it doesn't seem like it's possible. Covering those basics, understanding those things can help you develop and flesh out your world. Everyone needs these things to survive, and so by citing how that world covers these things or accounts for them, you can really flesh out and give yourself some story possibilities with your story or future stories. Like one thing that I know has never been clear is how does money work in Equestria versus gems in Equestria? Because gems are clearly valuable enough that Spike does several hours of labor for 6 gems. And yet they're so common that you can just go into a cave and literally just fill up your hat with gemstones. So are gems valuable or not valuable? The story, the show is inconsistent with that because it's not a show about economics. But it is something that, keen-eyed, fanfic writers and YouTube reviewers do occasionally point out from time to time. It's good if you can avoid that, because things like that tend to take a person out of the story. Other things, people need a place to sleep, people need things to eat, people need homes to live in. Where they live, their living environment can tell loads about a world, their economics, their technology, their living conditions, even their social values.
One thing that makes me laugh about the economics of MLP is the episode where Fluttershy had to pay 2 pieces of gold for 1 cherry.
Oh God! And then of course it's like 10 bits. It's like, what? I
saw a YouTube video that's like, your money is gold and it costs that much for 1 carrot? What the frick?
It's like it makes you wonder if there's like unicorns just creating gold, which is why gold just 10 pieces of gold for a cherry. Oh, dear me.
How's this for your gold standard?
I could see like Applejack, where it's like apples are actual currency in freaking Equestria, because the gold inflation has gone crazy.
Best friends too. Don't forget she tried to sell Rainbow. Rainbow Dash tried to sell Fluttershy to the.
Oh God. Okay, that's another whole social implication that doesn't get explored.
Talk about that later.
But that actually is a decent point, because also laws are an inherent thing to most worlds. Unless you are the only person in this world or landmass or wherever, get 3 people together, they are going to come up with some rules for who is allowed to do what. And you can show that in your setting. So when we say about how real is too real, as long as your description is not bogging down the story, some people really like to just plan out massive like economic trades of their various, kingdoms of their story or their that's fine. It's actually good stuff for a writer to know, but it doesn't necessarily have to make it into the story itself. Okay? So again, be aware, very few people like blocks of description, and so keep it to the story. All right. Almost done, I swear. God, no, I'm a liar. I'm such a liar. We got like 8 more things to go. 6 more things. All right. Does it need to be
slides?
So does it need to be realistic is another question that you're going to need to ask with your story. This is again when you're dealing with more statistical description. As long as your rules are consistent, you can have anything happen. If your rule is everyone at the age of 12 gets superpowers, fine. But if you suddenly have people getting superpowers at the age of 10 and some people getting superpowers at the age of 22, it starts to become really confused as to what are the rules in this place and how does this story work. Once that confusion sets in, it starts becoming a real. Okay, so you need to think of what level of realism do you need in your story. Some you need a lot. If you're going to do a Game of Thrones type story, you're going to get that granular detail that's going to have really important world building as far as economics and society and culture. But if you're doing something that is more, Narnia, no, it's more important to get those ideas and those emotions across than it is to decide what Aslan's tax law is. Okay, so by the way, if you write that, you may think that is a totally irrelevant thing, but I guarantee you will have one reader who's saying, by the way, this tiny obscure thing story, I love it. So, is what it is. That's not all the readers that wrote it going, why is he talking about the kingdom's tax law? Move on.
Blueberries.
Yeah. All right. All right, so can you get too realistic? Yes. This is when the description and world building usurps the story. The readers essentially start to feel like they are just being given a world to look at rather than things happening in it. And it's very frequently occurs when someone is simply informed that what they're seeing is important or awesome or amazing. You cannot make a reader feel like your story or your world is impressive. You can only present it and hope that they feel impressive. If you keep on trying to shove more and more of your world into the reader's face to the point that you're neglecting actually writing the next thing in your story, the reader is just going to move on to something else. Very few people just want to have a world talk to them for hours on it. There's some people that do, but they're few and far between. Make sure that you always respect the reader's time. If it's not important for the story, you can put it in somewhere else or work it in somewhere else. Okay? Don't feel like, oh, I need to be realistic. I need to be super realistic. Oh, I'm not realistic enough. I need to put more of my world in. That's a recipe for giving a bloated story with lots of things that don't necessarily pertain to the main story. Okay? Something else that doing this will do is it can actually stop you from writing at all. Most people probably know someone or are someone that has a world in their head and they are planning it and planning it and planning it. And they have world maps and fantasy maps and they have no idea what story goes to all of it. Eventually you have to tell the story. And if world building is in the way of telling the story, Sometimes you just have to set the world aside and write the story till you're done. If you've planned out a story or a world to that point, you should be able to incorporate. Don't be afraid of writing the story and use world building as an excuse not to write, because the story doesn't exist unless you write it. Ooh, ooh, so much talking. All right. So when you're going to be world building and you're wondering where you want to start, you kind of need to think about your story. What kind of story are you telling? Is this going to be this great epic masterpiece that's going to have the characters going all across the world and to the moon and to other planes of reality? Or is this going to be just downtown or in the school or just in their own home? You don't have to go amazing places to have an amazing story. So think about really what kind of story you're planning on telling before you go crazy with the world building. Because frequently you may not actually need some of the things that you have in it. Like if you're telling a story that's set in a small town and the focus is stuff on the small town, having this one character with this exotic, culture from the far side of the world is really going to stick out. And it might, be to the reader going, why is this here? Why are you telling me this? None of this seems to matter for the story. Go away. Likewise, if you're going to be doing this sweeping epic that's going to go to multiple nations and multiple cities and you got all these different places, you may not need to know about the nitty-gritty of, the best pies in the world are baked in this little cafe in the capital. Such details can be, very personal, but they can also get lost really easily. And so it's an important thing to keep in mind is that you want your world building to work for your story, not the story to work. All right, so when you're starting small, you think about the most immediate location that your story needs. And you start there and you start to fill out. A really good tool for this is a piece of paper. And you start with where the story begins and you just build it out from there. And when you need a location, you populate it on the map and you just jot down, its direction, how close, how far. And this kind of allows you to fill in the map as you need as the story progresses. One reason why this is a good way of world building is it gives you a lot of flexibility. Like, if you have blank areas on the map and the character is going through one of those blank areas, you can think of what are some things that could happen that would be interesting in it and advance the story in this blank spot. Or is there just nothing interesting there? If you need to suddenly put something in, you can, because you haven't described, every last square inch of the map. So it's not a bad way to world build, because as your story needs things, you can just pop it in and account for it in the world. The downside is that sometimes you can feel like, oh, this story is so small, it's not going to interest anyone. The story stands on its own merit. It doesn't stand on the world that you build for it. Okay? So focus on making sure that the world building in this method is coherent, intimate, and that it carries the story forward, and you'll be fine, right? You don't have to have a world map if everything is happening within a 2 or 3 day walk start of the story. So the opposite is to go big. And a lot of people, I am this, okay? This is building out the map before the story even happens, where you will get a big piece of paper and you will start to draw continents, like huge chunks of land, and you will start to put in geography, like here are mountains, and from the mountains you'll put in here are rivers, and from the rivers you'll decide, where are deserts, and from there you'll decide, okay, what kind of nation is here, what kind of nation is there. And you will start with these very broad strokes, and you'll work in smaller and smaller and smaller till you get to where the story actually starts. This will take up a lot of time. And generally, when you start a story this way, you have to account for a ton of things. Food, trade, population density, topography, magic and gods if you're doing fantasy, technology level if you're science or fantasy. Um, there's just a bunch of things to account for when you try to world build on the big scale. It's fun. It's honestly doing this kind of world building can be a good hobby, uh, but it sometimes does not lend itself well to storytelling because if you fill everything in and suddenly you need something in a certain place, well, you've kind of filled up most of the spaces on your map. Um, and so your alternative is, oh, well, now I need to put this location way the heck over here. Odds are you're now going to need a way to get all the way over there. And so your story may suddenly take a sharp right turn that you weren't anticipating simply because you don't have space in the space of the world you made. Um, as you fill it in, though, it does help generate ideas, characters, things that might appear in those places. Um, and so as long as you keep everything consistent and you make sure that they don't bleed together so that either they seem all the same or worse, everything is distinct by only one one characteristic. Um, it's called the Planet of Hats, by the way. Uh, you can generate a lot of good story content with this method. Um, just be aware, sometimes it helps if you leave empty spaces on the map. Ooh. Almost done, I swear, I swear. All right. You'll get some people that will insist one way is better than the other. Neither is. You need to do what is best for your story, not what someone else likes to do. If you see, websites where they talk about here's my 12-step, method of making a continent, but you're only making a small story of an elf in a little valley having to deal with a ogre. You don't need all that. You just need to know the rules of elves and ogres and magic and other things that might be in this area, not, what's happening on the side of the world. Now, whenever you create a world, you can also create exceptions. It's actually a very common thing where you create a world where everyone gets a power at 12 years old, but one person doesn't. And by creating the exception, now you are suddenly making that character special, because they do not follow the rules that everyone else accepts as true. You can explore that. How does society deal with exceptions? How does is this a problem or is this a benefit? Does it make life easier for the character or harder? As long as there are reasons for exceptions and as long as you account for the consequences of those exceptions, you can do a lot of good stuff with it. It's not a bad thing to break your rules as long as it's in line with the story you're trying to tell. If you're just breaking the rules to make your character shinier and specialer, sorry, that's leading to bad character. Try not to do that. Occasionally, though, as I said, when you have that exotic far world culture show up in your intimate story, it can tell the reader that there is a larger world out there and that this little bit of culture that seems so strange and doesn't fit in can help the reader pay attention to what's actually going on in the story around them. Likewise, if you have this very small intimate detail, it can make your world feel more realistic and lived in and help with that immersion rather than just being a list of countries and culture and languages and whatever. So it's an art. It takes a lot of practice. It can be a lot of fun. But ultimately it should be a tool for something else, whether that's telling a story, making a game, drawing art. Don't just let your worlds stop being worlds. Try to find ways of sharing them. Okay. That was a lot of talking. I apologize for talking that much. So this will be the last bit of yeah, My Hero Academia was one that I was thinking of an exception. No, we're done with slides. Thank you for sitting through all that. I know that was a lot. So questions, comments, concerns, criticisms.
I sent you a couple from the stream.
Yes. Okay. Fluttershy Sprout sounds like okay. What are some good ways to use off-screen events in a world? Okay, so the off-screen events should matter in that they advance the story, they create a complication or a conflict for the character. They should matter, at least in some way, to the overall story. You can have it be as simple as just, there's suddenly a stream of refugees and, oh, what happened? Oh, this terrible thing happened. Usually stories tend to be focused on their own story, and they get locked onto, well, this is the important thing we need doing. Sometimes it is interesting to explore, though, this major thing just happened. How do we react to it? Frequently, the off-screen big thing happening may actually be the story. Like, disaster stories are very frequently this, where, a horrible thing has happened. How do we survive it? Whether that's, plague or meteorite or nuke or whatever. It essentially is a rapid change in the setting, and how do people adapt to that? Other ways that you can do it is you trickle it in through character interaction, or you can even show environmental effects. Like if there's some kind of magical effect that's ripped the space-time continuum, and now suddenly you have artifacts from history popping in everywhere. That's a way that you can show that event affecting the story where it is there. As long as you just keep the rules of what pops in and what you do about it and what happens consistent, you should be fine. If you start changing the rules, you're going to need to account for those changes. And sometimes readers are not going to be happy with it. So it's a trick. What do they eat? I don't know, Captain Horse. What do they eat? They eat something. They eat people. They may eat people. That's what Soylent Green was all about. Should you figure out the rules of a story before writing the body of it? Yes, you absolutely should know the rules of your story. You may find out the rules as you write the story. That's a very organic way of doing it. Be consistent and be aware that there may be unforeseen consequences. If you are writing a story in that way, I would highly recommend keeping documentation. You can come up with some interesting ideas doing it that way. And suddenly, suddenly portals to the fairy realm appearing in your high school. May not think through all the implications of that, but it can be an interesting twist for your story. Especially when you start showing what do these portals actually do to the classrooms and the students that are in this school. There's a lot of different things that you can play. But I generally like to have my rules, my major rules written down, so that way I know what happens. Like in Homelands, I have to deal with spirits. And so one of the rules with spirits is you always want to wear a mask when you are spirit, so anything that the spirit does will interact with the mask and not you. Scotch interacts with many spirits, and she does not have a mask on, and because she does that, their curse hits her, and now she has to deal with the consequences of that curse. Another character has found a way essentially to get around this penalty, and it becomes a major plot point for her as a villain to be able to evade this normal rule, and cause some real evil stuff to happen. So knowing the rules and knowing how they can be broken and why they can be broken will help your story out immensely. Making the rules up on the fly can work, but you might write yourself into a corner, because it'll be like, oh yes, one rule is that with this magic I can bring people back from the dead. Oh, the main character's mother just died. Oh, why can't I bring the main character's mother back from the dead? See, suddenly I have to change the rules because what I needed for the story I can't do and still make sense. Grace deserved better. Alright, that was the premise of Class, a Doctor Who spin-off. No. Sometimes stories just don't work out, and you learn from them and you write the next story. You hope you do better. Is change of focus from one character to another a good reason to switch from granular to fantastic depending on the character's perspective? Yes. If you have 2 points of view and one is Applejack and the other is Derpy, Applejack probably has a very granular way of looking at the world. Derpy probably does not. Pinkie Pie does not. And so you can use these different points of view to give 2 different ways of interacting with the world, and the contrast, especially when they're dealing with the same things, could be interesting. Now, I say could be. Some people will be like, why are you telling me this thing with Applejack and then telling me the same thing with Derpy, only they may not catch it. That's not your problem, but if they don't read your story, well, what can you do? That Doctor Who girl as you Doctor Who versus Rainbow. Ear. Like, what kind of impact the off-screen event has to the story? Will there be? Okay, I think I answered that one. Will there be a montage of all the noises Somber makes? No, there will not, ever. All right. All right. So, anybody else have any questions on writing in general, or whatnot? We only have half an hour left. That's really not enough time to get into edits writing workshop and the like. Sorry for talking so much. This was 2 topics that I wanted to address before the con was over, and it just went super, super long to die. But I can still answer a few more questions if you got them. Nope, all good. Twitch good? Everyone good?
There's one on Twitch, one moment.
Okay.
Actually, there's a couple.
Okay.
They just posted in the 2 seconds I looked away.
No worries.
Here you go. That's 2 questions there.
All right. How do I get a job in creative writing? Funny. That's exactly what the topic of the last discussion is going to be. You're not going to like the answer. When it comes to fanfic, is there a good way to innovate without breaking source material? All the time. Essentially, that is what most good fan fiction is innovating off of source material. Either telling stories that the original property won't tell or can't tell. They won't tell, might get in trouble for writing them. There's copyright issues. Funny, again, that's what I'm talking about in the last workshop, is basically what you can do with your writing once you finish it. But when it comes to fanfic, you really have to focus on your own story. If you try to think about what other people have done, you're essentially just limiting yourself to the leftovers of the fandom. If you have an idea that you like, that you think is interesting, that you care for, it's as good a topic as any other. The good thing about writing fan fiction is that it is forgiving. The setting is already fairly well established, so you don't have to fill in or do a lot of world building. And if you do any world building, it's just changing the world everyone knows. And so that takes out a lot of the work. It gives you a sympathetic audience that generally will hopefully give you more leeway than a non-fan. And you just try what works. It's a good way of practicing, getting feedback. And sure, you're going to get some people that don't like your stories. Just be respectful. If their criticisms are on your story, find ways of making your story better. Find ways of making your ideas better. And it's just a process of lots and lots and lots of practice. But it's possible. You just need to keep working at it. Okay. I think that might be it. What you wanted to say? Well, what about if you want to take a story from the Fallout game, Fallout 4, and rewrite it? Okay. So there's a concept called fix, where you essentially don't like something in the main story or the original IP, and you essentially try to fix it. If you have a problem with this, other people might too. So there is a possibility of an audience for that. That said, there are certain intellectual properties that are a bit more restrictive in people writing fanfic of their work, and they employ legal departments that exist to send you cease and desist letters. And if you get such a letter, then you thank them for notifying you of their policy, and you stop writing and publishing. Because they can come after you. And fair use has never been tried at the Supreme Court. So that's something that will be talked about more next week. So it is something to keep in mind when you are writing fanfic. There are legal repercussions. Alrighty. Well, we only have about 20 minutes left, so I think we are just going to cut it off there. I apologize if folks wanted to workshop. If you did, and there's people in here that are willing to group up with you, there's nothing stopping you from workshopping it together yourselves. You don't need the seminar to share your work and come up with ideas. Oh, I'm sorry.
Whoa!
I'm sorry, man. This was just a lot of stuff, and I'm kind of brain dead. But if you have other people in the room that are willing to, workshop it with you, you absolutely can. But I myself need to go lay down because I've talked too much.